Afternoon and welcome to the channel. This is a follow-up video to the one I made last week at Hereford when I caught those big roach on the ground bait feeder. A lot of you have been in touch to ask how I make that feeder rig up from scratch. So today I'm going to show you all the components required and how I make the rig up. Right, the components required to make this rig are some £10 reel line, which is approximately 0.28 to 0.30 diameter. Some quick change hook length swivels. I like to use these Creluso ones because I like the double barrel on there, and also the round eye. Some float stops or gripper stops, and some snap link swivels. These are size 12, but you could use 8, 10, 14, whatever your preference is. So those are all the components you require to make the rig. Now the first thing I do is I take your float stops or gripper stops and I just put one onto the line like that. Then I take one of the hook length swivels and put that onto the line through the eye of the swivel. Then another gripper stop, float stop. This is a little bit fiddly. That's on there. Sometimes it pays to wet these, wet the line around these stops. That'll help it to just move into position. So what you'll see there is I've got that hook length swivel trapped between the two gripper stops. And it can just spin round on the line. Now what I do now is I snip off the little bit of line that you'll feel that will be slightly damaged from the wire on these when you pull them onto the line. So just snip off that 4 or 5 inches. Then I take one of my snap link swivels and I double over around about 6-8 inches of the line. Put it down together like that. Then push the doubled line through the swivel. This is called a polymer knot. I think it's a polymer knot, maybe called something else, but it's a knot I use. It's a bit fiddly, but this is by far the strongest knot for attaching a swivel to thick line. A little bit fiddly. Yeah, it's a little bit fiddly, this polymer knot, but it's worth it. So before you pull it tight, just give it a little wet and pull that down. Just make sure it's all sitting right on the eye of the swivel. And pull that tight. And snip off the excess. You probably leave again 3 or 4 mil. Don't cut it flush. 3 or 4 mil tag. You'll see that on there. And what we have now, what I've got here is the swivel attached to the line, and you've got your float stop trapping the hook length swivel just above there. Now this swivel, you can attach your feeder straight onto this swivel, any type of feeder. It can be used with window feeders, open enders, cages, bullet feeders, any type. And what you then do with that, you attach your hook length to this if you want to, or you can do what I did to increase the self hooking property of this rig. I like to tie a little twizzled loop of stiff line. I like to use a fluorocarbon for this. So I take a good quality £8 fluorocarbon and double it. I'll snip that off and tie a little twizzled to twizzle. Takes a little bit of practice this, but quite easy once you've done it a few times. You might remember I used this on the rig when I was catching those roach. Makes a big difference to the self-hooking property for this rig. So I finished that off with a figure of 8. So what I've got there is approximately 4 or 5 inches of twizzled line tied up with a figure of 8 knot. And what I'll do is I'll cut that off there, and that leaves me a little tag at the end and quite a bulky knot. What I now do with that is put that onto this quick change swivel. So what I've got now is that, and you'll see that stands off. I can pull that down slightly, and it helps protect the hook length against this, the lead on the feeder. And I can fish this in 2 ways. That enables me to fish it a paternoster as it is now. So if I want to use worm hook baits or fish for bream, and I want the fish to really take that bait and feel confident that there's no hook in it, so they'll take that with confidence, pull down and then move the feeder. So it gives you that little bit of play needed when you're fishing with a big bait like a worm. But what I was doing it on the river the other day was fishing it quite close, almost onto the top of the swivel there. So that is giving it a bolt effect. As you can see there, this area is attached to the rod and reel. This is my hook length. The fish could only move a couple of inches with that, with the bait in its mouth, before dislodging the feeder. And so quite a few of those bites, you get a little tremble, and just pick the rod up and it was self-hooked. But sometimes what you can do is pull them stops up a little bit, say 3 or 4 inches. And if the fish are just biting a little bit shyer, you've got that extra play in the rig. But what you do have, you would have to feed a little bit more line off the reel, so a slight bow in the line, if that makes sense. So when you feeder its bottom, just pull a couple of metres of line off to leave a slight bow, so the fish doesn't feel immediate resistance on the tip, it's got some room to move. But another thing you can do with this as well, there's another method called a dink, where you can actually have your hook length way above the feeder. So you have your feeder down here, down there, then you can attach a 6-inch hook length onto there. And that's quite a popular method if you're fishing for fast biting fish like dace. I'd usually use a maggot feeder with that, and I'd have that butted right up so it's an immediate bolt effect. So it'd be a tight line to the rod tip, and the fish would pull on that, and that'll give you an indication, and you just lift the rod up. Once again, you don't strike at any of these bites, you just lift it straight up. Fish is either on or it's not. And what I was doing the other day, I was only leaving it in, as you know, for a minute at a time. And that was by far the most effective way of connecting with those bites. One thing worth mentioning, if you are going to use this setup for the dink method for dace with a maggot feeder, you wouldn't have that piece of twizzled line on there. You just put your hook length, a 6-inch hook length, direct onto the onto that quick change swivel. That's it. So there you can see you've got your hook Should be above the feeder. You've got your hook here. As I say, that's the Dink method. If you pull them down, pull the float stops down, you've then got a mega short hook length close to the feeder. If you're really bagging up, that's a great way of fishing. And again, you'd be fishing quite a strong hook length with this. Probably 0.16 to 0.20, you wouldn't be fishing fine line with this. So you could actually dispense with that standoff. I was using that with, say, with a 30 centimetre hook length, 40 centimetres with this. 40 centimetres with that little stiff boom. But so this must be the most versatile feeder rig you could ever use, really, because you can use it in so many different situations. Like I say, you could have a rocket feeder on here or a big window feeder and cast anywhere up to 100 metres with this, and your hook length won't tangle. It's what they call an helicopter rig. But on rivers, you can fish it as a paternoster rig for bream. You can also fish it for the Dink method for those days, or you can do what I did and use it for roach fishing with that slightly longer hook length. But yeah, it must be the most versatile rig you could ever use. Once the rig's completed, pull off about 2.5 foot of line, cut it off, and tie a figure of 8 loop. Again, a figure of 8's a nice strong knot, not much break in that. The only fish I wouldn't use this for is barbel. Barbel and carp. Everything else would be absolutely fine with this. I've never been broke on these knots. So what I then have is a 2.5 foot rig, which I can then put onto one of these foam spools. And as you've seen when I've made that rig up, there's quite a lot of fiddly bits, the polymer knot, putting the float stops on, messing around with that twizzle boom. Now if you've got that already completed, you carry 2 or 3 of these on one of these spools, and if you do have a tangle or you break off on a snag or something like that, you've got another rig there ready to go. Literally takes a minute to put a new rig on, rather than having to make it up from scratch on the bank. So there you have it, ready to go on the spool. Okay, so that's how you tie the versatile rig. A quick rig on the bank is a popular one, which is just a standard. If you imagine this is from the reel, the most popular rig out there is probably just a twizzled loop rig, which is, you can tie it quite quickly. This is if you were going to be in a rush on the bank. Just tie a little figure of 8 loop, wet that up, and tie that, twizzle that down, 6-8 inches of twizzled line. Sometimes you wet that, it'll twizzle better. And again, another figure of 8. Snip it off again, leave 3 or 4 mil. Now that one there, that's just how it is. Now, if you want to incorporate a quick one of these, you could do it loop to loop over that loop. So you could have a quick change swivel there, or you could tie it into the loop if you wanted to do that. I don't bother with it. With this rig, I just use it loop to loop, because I'm never casting a long enough distance to need to worry about line twizzle, line twist. I never have to worry about that. But the quickest way is to tie that up then, and on the bank you can just put your swivel on. pull that up over there. Then just place a couple of stops on the line. It's quite a common rig this. I'm sure you've probably seen this rig before. It's ever so common nowadays. So you get a couple of stops. And that can be made up quickly on the bank. But it's nowhere near as versatile as the other rig, which I've showed you. Nowhere near. But it's quick. If you want a quick rig on the bank, that's the quickest one. That's the rig I use for big fish. If I'm fishing for barbel, I can use that rig. If I break off, I can tie it back up really quickly on the bank. Sometimes I'll use float stops rather than stops, but yeah, you can use either or. And that's, as I say, that's the big fish rig. If I'm fishing for barbel, that's the rig I use. So just put me feeder onto there. Depending on what bait I want to use on the hook, I can have a gap in the stops up to 4 or 5 inches, or I can bring them together from fishing things like maggots on the hook. So again, you have that quick bolt effect for a drop back bite. If you've put a little bow in the line, you get a quick drop back off that. Chub or barbel, using a bigger bait, an air rig or something, you might want to put a bit of a gap there. So again, it's still a bolt effect. I just have time to take the bait and then pull down and move the feeder, and again you get a big drop back. Anyway, I hope all these rigs are of use to you. So if you like the content, don't forget to subscribe. See you all soon.